Okay, so you know, what I found interesting, just as a closing note on analytic usage to date, I started out with data analytics in 1993, and it was because somebody had literally shelfware on the shelf, and we joke about some analytics software being shelfware, and I just they said, hey, why don't you go give a try with that software over there on the shelf and see what you can do with it. And I think it was because, data analytics became, just such a hot topic, during that time frame. And computers and PCs were so hot. I mean, nowadays it's our phones and our Apple watches, that seem to have much more focus. But I do find that, at the time that the PC era really was kind of taking hold, and we did quite a bit with analytics at the time. When you think about analytics, it is a science to be applied, and I think it is a great science to be applied to auditing. However, it isn't something that is completely required right now either. So it's understandable, that it's not like saying, we need to do sampling as part of our auditing. I mean, sampling has been around since probably the 60s in auditing, so that we understand that that's a bit of a requirement. But when we think about doing 100% auditing and using analytics, it's still something that is in growing in popularity, and is something that I find that isn't completely required yet. So as we talk about why are we not using analytics, keep kind of bear that in mind, as we talk this through. So, taking a look, I wanted to actually show from the International Institute for Analytics, just trying to get over to this next slide here, that this is an organization set up and focused on making sure that analytic programs are implemented, and they even benchmark companies to how well your analytics program is being done within the organization. And what they found is, up to 70% of analytic projects fail. And why? Is it the technology? Is the software buggy or something? No. There's a lot of disagreement on the strategy. Corporate cultures are not really built around data. There may not be enough knowledge, and people just are lacking the right skills to use the products. And these are some of the top points coming out, and this is all coming out from Gartner studies and Capgemini studies and etc. Now, I wrote a book a long time back on similar topic on essential project investment and governance, and it was all about technology projects at the time because it was back in the 2000s when technology projects were really taking hold. And when we take a look at technology projects, what we found was 56% of companies had to write off an IT project because it had failed so badly, and the average loss was $13 million. Biggest one was 210 million, and this was all from a study that KPMG had put out back in November of 2002. So, I mean, it's something where, technology projects in general tend to, be a little more difficult to implement. There is a lot more to it than just the technology, but I think we have to kind of, keep that in mind too. It's not something that only your company may be failing at implementing analytics. It tends to be rampant throughout the business world. So why? Why do you not include data analytics steps? And this is kind of one of the key points that I found when I thought about, why are we not using data analytics? It really should be part of the steps. Right now, as I said, sampling would be something that it was almost viewed that you had to use it because you had so much paper at the time that you had to get through, and it was so hard to manually pull stuff that you could only sample so much, and therefore you'd have to sample it. But nowadays, there really isn't a whole lot of paper. I mean, it's almost everything is in computer form. So, why aren't we doing more of this 100% type auditing? The first one is that it's just not integrated into the audit process. We haven't sat down and thought about it. The comments of data not available for all audits, it's not easily retrievable, the data owners are reluctant to allow auditors access. I just feel like in today's world, I understand back in the 90s, back in the 80s, when paper, kind of ruled the day, I get it. But in today's world, it's pretty much digitized everything. Even accounts payable invoices are emailed now. They're not, again, sent as paper. So I kind of question that a bit. I think that if companies pushed a little bit harder on the data side, we'll talk about that later in the presentation. I think that they can do a lot better of a job there. No time being allotted for data analytics in the audit steps. Again, definitely see that across the board when we talk to companies, and it almost requires that top-down culture. It requires, somebody walking down the hall and saying, what are we doing about analytics with that audit? And if the CAE audit VP director is doing that enough, just a few times a week, walking down the hall, that usually is enough to get people to start using them more. But I think it needs to be built into the audit plan. So, taking a look back at the 2012 study, I know these are a little hard to read here, but in looking at that, why aren't they being used? It's mostly software cost, training staff to use the software, management reluctance, too technical to use, learning curve, too difficult to get the data. But the software cost one is pretty high up on the list there, and that tends to kind of resonate in other studies that we've done as well. I'll just kind of move on to the 2015 study as well. So things haven't changed much, right? It's software costs, training of staff, management reluctance. I mean, they're pretty much topping the list, and I just feel when we talk about the best practices and start off on this, I think we need to do a better sales job on the software cost. I mean, at every company I've worked for, I've saved them millions. And it was usually using a little bit of software cost, a little bit of people time, a little bit of process time or to build a process. But there really wasn't a whole lot of cost when you looked at it. There might have been some upfront costs, so I can't argue that there wasn't upfront cost, but it wasn't that great in comparison to the amount of money that you were able to pull out of the back end of the process. So I think you had to sell that, and there are ways that we're going to talk about selling that quite frankly, you might have to find money first, and then go back and then actually buy the software and do the training, etc. And I find that may be an answer for a lot of organizations. But for many, I do find that software cost item being the why not used is a bit questionable, because it usually isn't that great in comparison to, let's say, implementing an SAP system, which will cost millions upon tens of millions of dollars to do, and then all we're doing is putting on some analytics that really doesn't cost that much in comparison to those numbers. Now, kind of moving on to another survey, it's almost it's hard to kind of go back and forth on the slides, but when you look at the 2015 reasons for not using data analytics software, and this was just another survey very similar to the other question where we said, why haven't you purchased it? The why aren't you using it if you have purchased it? We have no staff trained was one of the top ones. We don't have time to learn the software. There's no funding for training. And then the staff that we had and trained had left the company. So it kind of gets around the whole people aspect of things, having a champion and only one champion maybe within the organization, and then having that person leave, and just not maybe making a case for training at that point.